Hello and welcome to the Jester's Court, where we take a look at products that tend to unfairly get a bad rap and try to redeem them. I am your host, Mike, and with me, as almost always, is the wonderful Mom Thulu.
Or Jen.
Or
What's up,
Jen.
bitches?
How are you doing tonight, Mom Thulu? What have you been up to?
Yawning a whole lot on camera. That's what I've been doing ever since you started filming. But I haven't been up to much. What about you?
I had the pleasure of changing a flat tire on the interstate today, and it
It's
was
a
everything it's advertised to be.
scary experience for sure.
Especially with two children in the car who were, I'm bored.
I'm bored. Yeah.
Our poor son. I had to get scary, Dad. Like, do not go out of the car.
Do you think that he would have though?
I very much think of along on a timeline he would have.
Wow. Sometimes kids with ADHD have no self awareness of danger. They're just like, I'm bored. I'm gonna do a thing. They just
What are you
do
doing?
it. Yeah.
All right, boys and girls. Before we get started tonight, it is time for shout outs where we recognize our awesome patrons. We have this month 𝐥𝐤𝐤, Firebrand, Derek Diamond, and Mom Thulu sitting here in front of you.
Yeah, here I am.
Thank you all for helping us keep the lights on. If you too want to become a patron, just head on over to patron.com/thejesterscourt. Our tiers start as low as $3 a month. And that'll bring us to the main event. Tonight, we are talking about right off the bat, great music because Danny Elfman is awesome.
Yeah, is it elfin music that you're listening to right now?
Yes. But that's right, we're talking about The Frighteners, starring Michael J. Fox, and was directed by a little known guy, Peter Jackson. I don't really know that. Hey, Mom Thulu, do you know that guy?
Yeah, I know that guy.
He might have done a
Peter.
thing or two.
Yeah, I did a few things. Most notably, the Lord of the Rings series.
Lord
Um,
of the Rings. Is that like a jewelry show?
yeah, it's totally a jewelry show. He did a bunch of other stuff too. Like, did you know that he directed King Kong, which is actually kind of a shitty movie, but
It was a project of his. Did you know that?
yeah.
Like
Uh,
he very much wanted to do that
he
movie.
wanted to do it right. If you know anything about Peter Jackson, you know that Peter Jackson signs up for lots of projects, and sometimes they don't deliver. Fortunately for us, he delivered Lord of the Rings, like all of them, like 100% great movies. Um, King Kong, not so much. Some of his earlier stuff, not so much, but he has been known to deliver.
All right, so we're going to talk about The Frighteners, and as we did last week, before we do our little breakdown, we're going to do a rundown of the movie. Hopefully, I do a better job this week than I did last week, my first attempt.
Yeah, you did shitty last week.
Thanks.
You're
Awesome.
welcome.
Yeah, you did shitty.
If I'm not here to tell you where you've not done well, then what am I here for?
Witty banter.
Oh yeah, that's right.
And when I talk to just myself, my episodes last about 15 minutes.
Yeah, that's right.
So, The Frighteners. We open on a creepy house in the rain, and inside we see a young woman running away from something, and an older lady basically calling her a slut from upstairs.
What?
That What do you mean what? That's what was happening. She's like, she is evil. She is the sins of the flesh. I summarized. She called her a slut. She's calling her a slut.
Okay, I'll give it to you. Whatever.
We find out later that the young woman running is Patricia, who is one of our main characters.
Mm-hmm.
She's being attacked by the walls, or more accurately, something that looks like coming from inside the walls. It's that effect that they did a lot in the 90s. Where,
Yes,
like, the wall pushes out.
they did it a lot with Nightmare on Elm Street films.
They
So,
did. Nightmare on
mhm.
Elm Street, I'm pretty sure, created it, if I'm not mistaken, that
Yeah,
effect.
but theirs wasn't like CGI'd or anything like that. It was actually like a false wall, like a latex sheet that they were having
Yeah,
somebody like
this is the
push
horror
through.
movie that CGI built.
Yes, you are right. It was one of the very early CGIs.
Meanwhile, Grandma is back up is upstairs still with a shotgun.
Yep.
And we flash to. I wrote flash to modern time, but this is actually happening in the same time.
In modern times, right? And
It's not.
she
It
shoots
feels
the
like a
shit out of
flashback,
the.
but it's actually not a flashback.
Right. Patricia's being choked by the rug. Like the rug has become a person, an entity that it's like choking her. And grandma, it's not grandma, it's Patricia's mother, but mom shoots the rug thing, and
so it's not ending a flashback. It actually is just quickly transitioning to. For some reason, an editor is reading a news story out to the person who wrote it. Don't ask me why that's happening. About all the deaths. It's basically an exposition dump to tell us that there's been a lot of deaths lately, a lot of people dying of heart attacks, and this is a town that's already known for murder thanks to a nice big massacre at the asylum.
Yes. Right.
In between that, we're seeing, cut in between that scene, we're also seeing a funeral where we meet Frank, played by Michael J. Fox.
Yes.
Who is sleazing around handing out cards for his psychic detective agency before they promptly toss him out.
Psychic investigator, not detective. He's a psychic investigator.
And that's different how?
Because detectives solve crimes. He's just there. He's just investigating hauntings.
So anyway, he gets tossed out. And while driving home, it's kind of amazing Frank has not already been killed by his own driving.
God, he's a terrible driver.
He is cutting through the grass. He is almost hitting people. And in fact, he wrecks into a guy's lawn while on the way home.
That would be Ray.
Yes.
So yeah, the Ray jumps out of the house and like runs out there, and he's like bitching about his front lawn. He's not interested at all the person in the car if they were hurt or not. He's just more concerned with the fact that his lawn has
grass. He's making a point of like, you're gonna pay for every blade of grass.
Exactly. And he gives Ray his card, and he says, give me a call and we'll get this worked out. And Ray's still yelling at him, I'm gonna sue you for every time, blah blah. And so Frank pulls out, when he does, he makes sure that he runs over like his garden gnomes.
And it's funny because later on, we'll get to it later on, but when he comes back, he actually makes sure that he hits another piece of the fence.
Every single time, yeah.
But it flashes kind of quickly, and that happens a lot in this movie, but now we're flashed to who we'll find out her name is Lucy, pulling up to the house in front of the asylum, which is where the story began. She came in, she's filling in for another doctor. She finds Patricia, sees where the burns on her neck from where someone's choking her, and is immediately convinced that she is being abused by Greg.
Yeah, she's there for her hand though. Like the reason why Lucy, and her last name is Lipinski, is there is because she was called to the house because Patricia cut her hand during that altercation. So she's trying to get get Patricia's mom to like let them leave the house and go and get stitches, but she's like, absolutely not, give her antibiotics.
And to be fair to the assumption about, oh my God, she's abused, the mom is not helping that at all.
No, not at all.
Because the mom is being all shady and everything. Like, right. I can have her locked up anytime I want.
Right. And then she says some really cryptic shit at the end there. And she says, they said that she was just like used accessory after the fact, but I know the difference. I know it was cold-blooded murder. That's what she says when she shows Dr. Lipinski out.
Which obviously gets her curiosity up, because we're going to cut again, and now Lucy's watching a documentary about the mass killing perpetrated by a gentleman named Bartlett, who is played by Jake Busey.
Johnny Bartlett, right.
Johnny Bartlett. Oh, and you find out in this scene that Lucy is married to Ray, the angry lawn guy.
Yes. And Johnny Bartlett and Patricia were romantically involved. So the whole story of the massacre that they're watching is that Bartlett went into the asylum owned by Patricia's parents and just shot up a bunch of people. He got him 13 victims, I believe.
12.
No, 12.
That comes up later.
Right. And he says, as they're in the documentary that she's watching, Johnny Bartlett, as they're leading him to the courthouse, he says, got me a score, 12. That's one more than Starkweather. and then they go to talk about Charles
Yeah,
Starkweather.
Johnny's a little obsessed with being the best serial killer on the
The
planet.
best serial killer on the planet, right?
The documentary, as I think you might have just pointed out, does say that Patricia was arrested as an accessory.
Mm-hmm.
So she did spend some time in prison, and she got released recently. Not recently, like within the last few years, but she got released,
she was released
under
to
house
her
release to
mom.
mom.
Mm-hmm.
It's at this point where we start getting the haunting. Lights start flashing in the room. For some reason, not for some reason, we know why, because he's a con man, but Ray finds Frank's card conveniently in the bed as it's levitating, and all this haunting is going on.
You know what my favorite part of this whole scene is that while the bed is levitating with Lucy on it, like all this shit is happening, there's an Elvis statue that kind of like floats in front of Ray, and he's like, he's alive, and like he's not even worried about Lucy.
It's a great haunting scene, because this is where the horror comedy comes in, because it's the funniest.
Yeah.
Not dark or scary at all. It is literally just hilarious.
Yes.
Lucy calls Frank, much to Ray's. Ray was not happy about that at all.
Much to his dismay.
Who arrives, and as I mentioned before, Frank hits the fence to purposely make sure to hit another chunk of the fence.
Yes, and take out more gnomes.
As Frank comes in, you'll see this later because he says the exact same phrases to someone else, but he's very clearly a con man. What's funny is he's a con man who he can see the ghost. That part's real. But he uses the ghost to make money.
He and the ghost are in on it together.
Yeah.
So.
He gets in the house. He pulls out what looks like a radio.
Right.
With some glowy lights on it. And a squirt gun with holy water. And he's walking around, and it's very Peter Jacksons-esque.
Yes.
From Ghostbusters, when he's walking around with that little squishy thing.
Yeah.
He's just randomly spraying places with the holy water.
Right, in the fridge, in the freezer.
All while talking about how this is totally technical, like, oh yeah, this happens this time of year, and oh my god, it's a full-on this. In a very flashy scene, he takes care of the ghost. So I'm doing quotations if you're on the pod.
The little radio spits out a little tiny gift bag, a little like metallic.
It looks like a little
bag.
coffee sample bag.
And he puts it in the garbage disposal.
But we do get a first little bit of ominousness as he's leaving the house. By the way, they managed to talk their way into calling it even, so the whole reason for this haunting was so that Frank did not have to pay for
the lawn.
And in fact, talks him into an extra $100. Did you catch that?
Yeah.
At the very end of it, he's like, well, we'll call it even, but call it $100. I can't go out of pocket.
Right.
My expenses. But as Frank is leaving, we see the number 37 glowing on Ray's forehead.
47. No, you're right. 37.
37, because later on, they're talking about 41.
You're right.
So 37, and now for the first time...
What's the number, right?
Yeah, now for the first time, Frank looks worried.
Yeah.
So as Frank leaves, you see... at this point, I'm calling him the Wall Man. Later on, I'll call him the Hooded Ghost. But
yes,
the action ghost is there, and they see him as Frank is leaving. As Frank gets home, the two ghosts that were in the house come out of his trunk, and this is where we find out, as we said, that these ghosts were actually working for him. And one is, and I don't know the actor's name, but the black gentleman. I love him. He was in House. He was in that Boston Public, the school show.
Let me see.
He's hilarious.
Cyrus, that's the name of the ghost. Chi McBride?
Yes. Okay. He is so freaking funny.
Yes, he's there. And Stuart is the name of the other ghost, and there's a third ghost in the house that's helping, and his name is the Judge. Played by
Sean Austin's stepdad.
John Austin, yes.
And I just have written here some great scenes with Frank and the Ghost, because most of the comedy, as a matter of fact, I'm going to go ahead and say all the comedy of this, except for Jeremy Combs, is in the interaction of the ghosts.
The ghost. I like when he gets out of the car, and like Stuart, you can tell, was like this big dweeb before he died, and he's like sick, like he's got like sick on his face and stuff like that, and so all that Frank does is like just make like barf motions, and he gets like Stuart to barf, but he barfs out his ears because he's a ghost.
Yes.
So
it's great. You also find out, not really ominously, like slavery ominously, but you do find out that Frank is kind of keeping the ghosts there a little bit against their will, because they're like, the judge wants to be let go, wants to be released. So,
but they can go back to to their graves if they want to. It's
You
just,
kind of get the feeling that they couldn't, though.
they can, because remember,
Well,
he
not
talks
they
about
physically can, but you kind of get the feeling that Frank is, however, keeping, because the judge is like,
like
man, let me retire.
yeah, he definitely talks them into, and they're at one point they're even like talking their terms, like they're gonna go on strike over Frank's morning cup of coffee. So yeah.
We do come to the next morning, and now we're flashing to another con job. This time there's babies, and again another hilarious scene because there's 3 babies in this house, and this poor housekeeper, nanny, whatever she is, and the babies are just floating through the air, coming at them.
Yeah, you know what's great about that is whenever Stuart and Cyrus are there, they were like, "Hey kids, you want to help us scare the crap
And the kids
out of your
can
mom?"
see them, and
And they're like, the kids are like, and he's like, the kids always get it.
so finds the card again conveniently. Frank gets called, and he shows up, starts to get the exact same verbatim spiel that he gave to Lucy and Ray, but it turns out he's been caught.
He's been caught. Yeah.
The paper put him on the front cover as a con man.
It says local con man haunts cemetery. They never explain how they know he's a con man, but other than he's saying that he's psychic. But
yeah, I mean they're assuming, and giving how he makes money.
Right.
So Frank goes to the paper to complain.
Yeah.
And as he's leaving the paper, we run into
He
Ray
sees
again.
the procession, right?
He sees the funeral procession. I'm not sure which order it happens, but
it's the funeral procession first, right?
But then you see Ray, who's a ghost.
Yes.
Clearly, Ray has passed.
Right.
And you actually find out that Frank knows a little bit of his stuff because he's explaining to Ray how this works.
Mm-hmm.
And why did you pass? First off, why did you pass the light?
Yeah, like why didn't you go down the corridor of light, right?
But then some actual really detailed stuff about how you'll get another chance later, and
yeah, like he really does go into this whole spiel. So you get this sense that Frank's been dealing with this for a while.
Not only that, but he actually does know his stuff.
Right.
Ray asks him to take him to see his own funeral, which is understandable. As we get into the graveyard, into the cemetery, we see all kinds of ghosts there, including a drill sergeant, Hills, who is played by 𝐬𝐸𝐸, who is just freaking amazing.
So good.
Who does not like Frank at all.
No.
And actually, this is where you find out the ghost can make contact because he actually starts beating up Frank.
Yeah, you know what's great about that scene is like every time that he does something, he changes outfits when he does it.
Yes.
So like he pushes Frank when he's in his drill sergeant uniform, and then Frank goes to swing, and he's all of a sudden he's in riot gear with like a riot shield, and Frank hits it, and then he's like, god damn it, and then all of a sudden he turns around and he's in his boxers and a freaking wife beater tank top with boxing gloves on, and you're just like, what?
It's great.
Yes, it's so good.
So he gets away from Sergeant Hills, who will come back later, folks, don't worry. After the funeral, you meet the sheriff of the town, who comes up and asks him about Ray's death, and mentions that the FBI is curious about all the deaths, and he actually asks Frank if he can come by to help.
Right.
Because at various points in the movie, you can't tell, does the sheriff believe in Frank or not? Because sometimes he's calling him a charlatan. Sometimes he's like, hey, can you help us with these weird deaths?
Right. Well, that's because obviously Frank at some point has showed that he can do things. But at the same breath, like.
As he's trying to leave, though, Lucy sees him at the funeral.
Right.
And asks him if he has any message from Ray. Ray, who, by the way, is yelling, like, yes, tell her this. And he kind of stalls.
Mm-hmm.
And then he finally, and not because Ray was bugging him, but because Lucy, I can't remember the exact line, but she basically implied that she knew he was full of crap.
Mm-hmm.
And that was when Frank goes, Ray says I love you. Right. And we flash, and it was a flash, to Frank and Lucy at dinner at what looks like a ripoff of Medieval Times without the... It's Medieval Times without the actual performance.
Right. Everybody's walking around in medieval wear.
They're all dressed like it's Renaissance.
It's so
I don't
crazy.
understand it at all. But they're having dinner with Ghost Ray, Lucy, and Frank. Yes. And then it's just a conversation. some back and forth, some comedy. She asked Ray where the $16,000 he invested for her was, and he's like, the ghost is
Ooh,
freaking
it was
out,
a
like,
bad
oh, I
investment.
lost it. But the purpose of this really is you get a little of Frank's background.
Right.
So you find out that he used to be an architect. You found out that he started having these gifts after he was in a car accident.
That his wife passed away in.
I don't think at this point it tells you that.
Okay.
I think at this point he just says he was in a car accident. He kind of blows it off.
She asks, how does one end up with this gift? And he says, you have to be in like a near-death experience or something like that.
Ray, at some point, Ray ends up leaving bad.
Mm-hmm.
And then Frank goes to the bathroom. And in the bathroom, Frank sees another person with a forehead number. This time it's 38.
Yes, 38.
And this time Frank actually sees the hooded ghost, which, I'm still calling Wallman in my notes, but later on you'll find out, but I don't want to spoil. And a hooded figure actually reaches through the mirror, so I can start calling him hooded figure for real.
Mm-hmm.
And kills number 38 guy.
Right. And it looks like the guy's having a heart attack, but the way that the thing is killing him, and they refer to it as like the Grim Reaper, and it does at some point have a scythe and everything like a Grim Reaper.
Yeah, it's almost a costume.
Yes.
When we tell you who the killer is, if you haven't seen this, it's costume.
But
I'd be remiss if I didn't point out before you see the hooded figure. So Frank looking around the bathroom.
All crazy.
All crazy.
Mission Impossible style.
Like busting open doors and stuff. Meanwhile, this guy's just peeing.
Yeah, he's
like
just
looking at him like, what the hell are you doing?
What are you doing? But the hooded ghost sticks its hand into people's chests and crushes their heart. So, when they do the autopsies on them, they find that their arteries are clean. There's no reason for a heart attack, but their heart has undergone so much stress that it is literally crushed.
So we're gonna flash back between a couple scenes here. You end up seeing at the police station, and they're talking about how Frank was seen leaving the bathroom in a hurry.
Mm-hmm.
So we're starting to feel that the cops are thinking Frank has something to do with this. He ran out, there was a body in there. Meanwhile, it does flash back to Frank, who is still chasing the hooded ghost with his usual awesome driving.
Right.
He really drives badly.
So bad.
And then again, it flashes back, and we're looking at the police station where we finally meet FBI agent Dammers, who is played by the amazing Jeffrey Combs. Who, if you're a fan of Star Trek, he is about 30 different characters in Star Trek.
Yeah.
He is amazing. He's questioning Lucy about Frank and about the dinner. Clearly, the police are sort of thinking it.
Right.
Agent Dammers is convinced from the get Frank is doing
this. Right.
In the process of interrogating Lucy, he does give us more of the story, and this is where we find out that the car accident involved Frank's former wife. And it was this whole big setup that him and his wife were fighting over a garden. They got into the accident together. Frank's box cutter was missing.
Right, and her corpse had the number 13 carved into its head.
And Frank was found 2 hours after the fact, wandering around in the woods, claiming he had no memory of anything.
Right.
So,
which he kind of holds to in the movie until the very end. Like, he knows what happened.
It's true. You actually see it revealed to him when he actually remembers what happens.
Right.
So Frank, in the process of this, has lost the hooded ghost.
Mm-hmm.
So we're flashing back, and now he's back in the car. His three ghost friends, Stuart and
Cyrus
and the judge, are talking. The judge thinks that this is death. He doesn't think it's a ghost. He doesn't think it's a person. He thinks it's actually death. And very quickly in that conversation, you see in the distance another dead body.
Right.
Well, you see the light because you saw the mechanic when the guy in the bathroom died. Like a big tunnel of light comes in.
Right.
And that's what they see from the distance is in the building. Someone's dead.
Mm-hmm.
And Frank follows that light. He actually gets there, sees the ghost actually has the number carved in his head with number 40.
Right.
It's
a museum, though. It's a museum that they're in.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. It was number 39 because number 40 is actually going to be Lucy. So he sees the dead body who has the number 39 carved in his head. Then he also sees, still alive at this party, a woman with the number 40. And it's the woman who found out he was a charlatan.
Right.
By the way, just to connect for motive
Her name
for
is
everyone.
Magda. She's the editor at the paper.
Yeah, so this is just so you guys know that where the motive comes from. The cops are like, okay, now this person. Hooded Ghost almost gets it right there, but the judge saves him. Interestingly, this is your favorite scene, Mom Thulu. The judge distracts everyone to help get Frank get away, and the way he distracts it is he's having sex with
the mummy
corpse in a mummy.
He was
coffin.
like, ooh. He's like, fine, woman. And he just jumps in there. You see his like little butt coming in and out of the
so basically, the timeline is, okay, we see the next victim, number 40. Hooded figure goes after him. The judge comes in, shoots the hooded figure, saves the woman. The police are trying to detain Frank, and Frank gets away in part because the judge just starts making the move on some mummy.
Yes. It's
but
so funny.
Sadly, you find out that ghosts can kill ghosts because as they're all making their getaway, the hooded figure kills the judge with his scythe. Right. This is what you were talking about, the scythe. But on his way out, Frank does grab the next victim, making himself look super innocent, and drives away with the hooded ghost following him in the car.
Yep.
The ghost runs Frank off the road. All the while, see, this is where it gets interesting, because all the while, this is why I think he remembered it later. Because while this is happening, Frank's having flashes of his wife's death.
Yes, and he has Magda in the car. Did you mention that?
Yes, he grabbed her on the way out.
Right, he like punched her in the face.
Yeah, I even said, making him look super innocent for the cops. He kidnaps her.
He literally punches her in the face and drags her out because she had the number on her head.
But so now we're seeing flashes of Frank's, while he's running, and in all this chaos, the hooded ghost gets Magna, get number 40.
Right. And you know what's crazy is her ghost pops out of her body like screaming at Frank.
And screaming at Frank, saying that Frank killed her is like, but he didn't kill you.
Right.
But so back at the police station now, and you see this gag happens a lot, but it landed for me still. But it's overdone. It's a trope. The FBI is telling the cops, "Oh, you're never gonna see Frank again. He's smart. He's resourceful. He's on the run." And while he's saying this, Frank just pops up right behind them.
Yeah, Frank just like walks in casually, looking around, all confused, like
to report that Magna is dead and near his car.
Mm-hmm.
So of course the police arrest him because he left with this woman and now she's dead.
Right, and Lucy was already there, so she sees them like arresting Frank, and she's like, "No, you're a good person. You couldn't have done this." And I mean, any police officer would be like, "How is he crushing hearts?" But anyway.
But Danvers is a little off. I mean, at this
off.
point, you could tell he's a little off.
Right.
Trust me, folks, he gets weirder. And actually, it kicks the sheriff out of the room for making your exact point. The sheriff's like, "It can't be Frank." And he pulls FBI powers and kicks the sheriff out of the room.
Exactly. He's doing that. This is my jurisdiction thing.
And at this point, we actually get him verbalizing for the first time that he thinks Frank is a serial killer and has killed 28 people, starting with his own wife.
Right.
So while this is happening, Lucy's left and is at Frank's house because, snooping around.
Mm-hmm.
And we see that Ray is still following around because Ray is following Lucy while she's snooping around.
The whole time.
And while she's in the house, breaking and entering, she overhears an answering machine message from Patricia's mom. What else?
Right.
I can't think of the character's name. I just been calling her Grandma.
In
my head.
I don't really think that she had a name, right?
They had a last name, so I guess you could be Mrs.
Right. Patricia is... Hold on. She is Patricia Bradley, so Mrs. Bradley.
Probably. And maybe that's why I can't think of her first name. But anyway, it's her asking Frank for help.
Right.
Spooky stuff is going on.
I'm looking at the cast. She's actually listed as Old Lady Bradley.
So I wasn't far off by calling her Grandma in my notes.
Right, right.
So Lucy shows up, and I don't know if I mentioned this before, but Patricia at her mom's house is actually the on-property house for the asylum where the murders happened.
Right, we mentioned it, yeah.
In case I didn't specifically mention.
Right, so the house is there, and then the hospital is in the back.
Like administrators used to live on site, and that's what this was.
Mm-hmm.
Because Lucy's dad was the hospital administrator during the shooting.
Exactly.
So Lucy shows up at the house looking for Patricia. Again, she thinks this woman's being abused. So she finds Patricia, who tells her that her mother says she's evil, feeding into her. Oh my God, this woman's abusing her.
Right.
And gets her to follow Patricia to her mom's room.
Right, and that's where they, they're in there snooping around. They find the box cutter.
Well, yeah, because mom comes home. Patricia's like, "Oh crap, hide in the closet. I'll get rid of her." And while while Lucy's hiding in the closet, she finds Frank's box cutter. So now she's like, "What?"
Right.
As Lucy tries to leave, so Patricia successfully distracts mom. Lucy goes to leave, and we see the hooded ghost following her, and Ray is still with her, and hooded ghost kills Ray.
Mm-hmm. That's my favorite part. Is he busts and he's like, "Lucy, go!"
Oh, brave and cool.
Yeah.
Even though Lucy can't see him, and it means nothing. Lucy heads back to the police station to see Frank. She tells him that she found the box cutter. Frank looks up, finally, because it took her a while to convince him. And he sees that Lucy now has 41 written on her forehead.
Yeah, and he's like grabbing her and like moving her around.
Well, yeah, because he immediately, as soon as he notices this, the hooded ghost tries to kill her. Like, he comes out. They're saved again by Frank's ghosts, who are like the awesome folks in this movie.
Yeah, Stuart and Cyrus.
We still kill one of Frank's ghosts.
Stuart.
Grab an orb. And this is kind of cool. So it kind of suggests that he's getting power from these ghosts. Because after he kills them, you see him reach down and grab a little orb.
Yeah, like their soul, and he like crushes it.
Yeah, so it kind of implies maybe that's why he's so much cooler than the other ghosts. Because he can do way more things. But Frank and Lucy make a run for it out of the station. And the hooded ghost takes Cyrus. So now all our ghost friends are gone.
They're all gone.
Which is really one of the saddest moments in the movie.
Yeah, I know.
Frank says he can't fight the hood as he is. The only way that he needs to have an out-of-body experience. Basically, I can't deal with this guy as a human. I need to
be. But his solution was to
he literally was going to shoot himself in the head. And so Lucy has a slightly less crazy plan. Slightly.
A little more chance of survivability.
She injects him with something and throws him into a freezer.
Right.
She makes a point of telling him he only has about 20 minutes before she can revive him. Otherwise, he's going to start to, have tissue damage. This is important because as soon as she says this, Agent Dammers appears, kidnaps Lucy, leaving Frank locked in the freezer.
Right. Meanwhile, Frank is floating around.
Yeah, Frank has his out-of-body experience. He sees the light, and obviously he skips it because, he's not planning on staying dead.
Right.
Sees the hooded ghost and follows, ending up confronting him in the street. He was doing pretty well until a truck ran them both over.
Right.
Because the ghosts are they can pass through things, but sometimes things catch them off guard or whatever.
Yeah, like they're semi-corporeal, right?
And this is also, sorry, I almost skipped ahead too much. So Dammers arrives at the cemetery now. You see him with Lucy. He strips off his shirt, and he's got all kinds of, like, occult things carved into his chest.
It's supposed to be this, like, profound moment, too. Like, he's meaning it to be this profound moment of I've done so much, and I believe I have these powers because I've been through so much and stuff, and it's really weird.
He basically gives the Bane speech from Batman Begins, but way crazier and less cool.
Right.
Because he's like, Frank thinks he knows what he's talking about, but I was born into this, and I did this, and he's cray-cray.
He's crazy.
Yeah. Meanwhile, while he's out front doing his little monologue, bad guys, you should never monologue.
Right.
The police car starts up on its own and starts to back up with Lucy still in the back.
She's like, Frank, is that you?
And it is Frank, who is promptly ripped out of the car by Sergeant 𝐬𝐤𝐬.
Yes.
Who, again, does not like Frank.
No. And he's like, what did he call him? He's like, called him a skin bag or something.
Yes. Frank gets back to the car away from 𝐬𝐤𝐬𝐬's just in time to save Lucy again from the hooded ghost.
Right. 𝐬𝐤𝐬𝐬 gets chopped in half.
Yes.
And so he's got these big like machine guns, and he's
which
like
Frank actually steals to
shoot up the hooded ghost, right?
So Lucy escapes to go to revive Frank.
Meanwhile, Frank is beating the shit out of the hooded ghost.
Yes, and this is where we find out, because after he beats the living crap out of the hooded ghost,
he grabs like the ectoplasm that's like slinking away and like
boom,
beats it.
wails on it. And this is where, out of the goo that's left over, Johnny Bartlett's face comes out.
Right.
And we get to see who who this guy is. Frank gets Bartlett, and just as he's about to take Frank gets his scythe, and just as about I can't get this sentence out.
Just as he's about to take
care of, yes, he is this close from ending the movie. The movie's done because he is about to take out Bartlett. And what happens? Lucy revives him, and he gets sucked back into his body.
Yes.
Lucy, at this point, who still thinks Patricia is an abuse victim, is worried for her and goes back to get her out of the house. Because now they know it's Bartlett. They think Bartlett's going to come after Patricia.
Right.
She finds Patricia, fights with Patricia's mom, who leaves upstairs with Patricia following.
Mm-hmm.
A few minutes later, and it's not super long, Patricia comes back down and says, Mom's going to come. I talked her into it. She knows that Bartlett's back. She told her that he torments her. But while she's doing that, from the audience perspective, we see her talking to Bartlett.
Yes.
So Lucy is not aware of this just yet, but we can now see for sure Patricia is working with.
Lucy starts to catch on that things are going wrong because Patricia's doing things like touching Johnny's face.
Yes, that's where the very next thing is I had written down is Lucy catches on because Patricia is being weird. Like she's interacting with a ghost that Lucy can't see. So she's not really trying super hard.
Right.
Lucy goes upstairs to find the mother and finds her dead.
Right.
Which, by the way, why did the mother not count their body counts?
Oh, because
the next number was still 41.
Because even though she wasn't killed by Bartlett though. She was killed by Patricia.
They shared deaths. In the flashbacks, right. She killed some of them, and they were going to count. They were going to let her kill Patricia, or kill Lucy.
Yeah, I just think it's because Patricia did it all on her own. So, and he wasn't like part of the planning.
I wondered that because the number stayed at 41.
Right.
So she finds Mom is dead, and Patricia, of course, shows up right behind her with a knife.
Right.
Frank arrives to find Lucy fighting off Bartlett and Patricia. He jumps into the fight, and in that process, we find out that the urn that we saw earlier in Patricia's room that she said it was her dad. Mm-hmm. Not her dad.
No,
it's Johnny's.
Johnny.
Frank has the idea that to get rid of Bartlett, we're going to have to get the ashes to consecrated ground.
Right, we need to take him to consecrated ground. So
Lucy reminds him there's a chapel in the asylum. Because when you're dealing with an angry ghost, where do you want to go?
Into a
creepy old asylum.
Right.
With a violent past.
A violent past from the ghost.
So they run to the asylum proper looking for the chapel. And Frank walks in and immediately finds himself basically reliving Johnny's killing spree.
Yes.
So it's just like when we saw his wife die. He's like in the real world right now, but he's also flashing where he sees the things happening. Meanwhile, while that's happening, Agent Danvers is following. And behind him is Patricia. So it's like a line of people.
Yeah, and they're all coming after them.
Danvers gets Lucy, but she gets away. She actually runs into the elevator and heads to the 4th floor. Meanwhile, Frank is hiding from Patricia, who's hunting around for him. Frank loses Patricia, but finds Lucy is stuck in the elevator because she got to the 4th floor and it was all blocked up.
Right. Gets
the urn from her and almost gets to the chapel. Almost. But right at the last minute, Danvers gets him, grabs the urn, and pours all the ashes out the window.
Right.
So now how are we going to get the dang ghost again?
Right, because Johnny Bartlett's face is like, as he's like,
because at this point, he's still convinced that Frank is, like, the ghost is all just Frank's imagination. And he's thinking he's going to kill the illusion. Like, oh, you think you need to get this to consecrated ground to get rid of the ghost. It's all in your head. And he pours it out.
Right.
So, this is a really cool scene, actually. So, Frank knows that, okay, you got Danvers in front of him, and he's got Patricia behind him, and he's stuck. and as he's kind of walking backwards, he feels like a little hole in the floor. And he times it just perfectly where he steps through this hole right as Patricia's firing the shotgun. So Frank is cool, but Danvers gets his head blown off. Literally.
Yes.
Literally, his head is blown off. And they did a CGI of the ghost, so his physical head's blown off, and it's a ghost head sticking out of the body.
That's a cool effect, too. I mean, you can tell it's dated if you go back and you watch it, but it's still a cool effect.
This was the infancy of CGI.
Yes,
so.
Yes, big time.
Lucy, at this point, got herself free of the elevator, finds Frank. Good news, he's not dead, even though he fell through 4 floors.
Right.
He is pretty hurt, and now we finally see the last piece of the puzzle, which is Patricia carving the number into Frank's wife.
Right.
As Bartlett kills him. So the last little tiny proof of Patricia and Bartlett are working together.
Right, and he saw that in his flashbacks as well, like whenever they were going through because while Frank's going through this hospital and running away, he's having all the flashbacks of the violent thing that happened there. And so as he's seeing Bartlett kill people, and Patricia too, but he sees that she's also carving the numbers in their heads.
So she is actively...
Oh yeah, it has been from the beginning.
So the fight continues because this has been going on and off. This is the big climax. So
it's a really
lots
long
of fighting.
Climax, you guys. It's really long.
In the process, Frank gets killed, and
yes.
just hold on, folks, because it's a movie. But for the moment, Frank is dead, and just as Patricia is about to kill Lucy, Frank rips her ghost out of her body.
Right, her spirit just pulls her right out.
And
starts going up
whether her death or his death, one of their deaths triggers the light tunnel.
It was his, I believe, because he pulled her while he was going up the corridor of light.
So he's got her in a bear hug, and she's being drug up to wherever.
And she's screaming, "Johnny, Johnny!" And he
Who
doesn't
follows.
let her go. Right, so he follows to try to get Patty. So
Bartlett and Patricia get at this point they end up in what looks like what you're assuming is heaven, the good place, whatever you want to call it.
That's where Frank ends up because they're still in the corridor.
Wait. Yeah, they're in the corridor. But hold on, because Frank's there, and you see Cyrus
and Stuart
back, and they look down at Bartlett and Patricia, who are still talking trash. At this point, they're like, "We're going back.
Yeah, we're
gonna keep going."
Yeah.
No, not so much. Because now they're in the afterlife purview of a giant worm monster. Is that?
The corridor turns from a corridor of light to
happiness.
A giant
worm.
And it looks like an intestine almost, but
chains and stuff, grabbing them. Very painful. Very clearly, they are going
to
not
HE
back
double
to
hockey
Earth.
sticks. Yeah.
After all this, Cyrus tells Frank, and Frank sees his wife too. But they all tell him it's not his time. And he gets sent back.
He gets sent back.
Where he and Lucy live happily ever after.
Yes. There's a little
Lucy
bit more
can now
to
see
the
ghosts.
end. She can now see ghosts too. There's a little bit more to the end, but basically that's the conclusion of the story.
And wow, there was a lot going on in that movie. That felt like it took an hour.
It did.
There was a lot going on in this film.
Right.
So that's the rundown, though. This was released in 1996, and I'm sad to say this because I love it so much. A financial flop.
It was a financial flop because while it costed $26 million to make it, it only made $29 million.
17 domestic.
You sure? My numbers say differently.
I got 17 million domestic off a $26 million
budget.
Maybe
I'm going by
you might be looking at worldwide.
Worldwide, right? It was 26 million to make, and it made 29.3 million worldwide.
Either way, very much a box office bomb. It's worth noting, and this fact keeps coming up, bad timing. In this case, the movie was supposed to be an October release for Halloween.
Mm-hmm.
Universal had a film fall through, and they had to have something releasing in July. And they said, "Hey, we like what you're doing with this film. We're going to release it now."
Right.
So over the productions and Jackson's explicit objections, they moved it to July, and it flopped because I do think he's right. I do think this would have been better.
As a seasonal movie, right? You're right.
It currently has the rating of 26% on Rotten
No,
Tomatoes.
no. It does not. It has a rating of 67.
No, ma'am.
Yes, sir. I'm looking right at it.
No, ma'am.
Yes, sir. I'm looking right at it.
Which one are you looking at, audience or?
I'm looking at tomato meter, 67%. Audience meter, 71.
I don't think that's right.
It is. I'm looking right at it.
Anyway, can I get on to the point? The point is not the percentage. The point is not the percentage. There are complaints. All special effects, no story is thrown around. Ebert calls it a frantic nonstop action, but he goes nowhere.
Right.
But where I want us to focus, and Mom Thulu got a little warning on this so she could prepare her thoughts, is on there's a lot of talk about the film should have been more comedy, less horror, or vice versa. In general, it seems like they weren't really feeling the comedy-horror split. And a lot more people than not were saying that this would have been better had Jackson stuck with a more horror feel like he had with his earlier work.
And they forgot to point out, though, and this is where I come in to talk about Peter Jackson. Peter Jackson's earlier work of horror movies were comedies. So this fits right into his trope. They were like, I wish you would have gone more. But have you ever seen, it's called Dead Alive. And actually it's called Brain Dead was the name of the movie as he wrote it. And it's a zombie flick. And it is campy as fuck. And I mean, it's got a huge cult following. But it's funny. It's funny. Most of his horror movies were funny. So there was, at least even if they were more serious at the end, there was a ton of comedy in them. So when people
outside of that, what I want you to expound on is, do you think this would have been a better movie had it been more serious?
No, I think it's perfect. I think it's perfect the way it is, because sometimes, especially in this type of horror movie, with the paranormal and stuff like that, if it's too serious, then it gets boring, right? So it had the perfect amount of humor and horror.
But personally, I agree. I just wanted to get our horror expert, and Mom Thulu, as in addition to being a co-host, is our horror movie expert.
Ta-da!
I really enjoyed this film when it came out in the 90s, and as we found out when we watched it this week, it still holds up.
Still holds up. And there's so many people that agree. I was just on an episode with the Longbox guys, and I believe it was Mike that said, from the Longbox guys, this was like on his top list of horror movies. So it's loved by many.
Us included.
Us included.
So, we agree this is a good film. It is now time for fun facts.
Yeah, let's hear them.
You ready for some fun facts?
I am.
This was the last time you see Michael J. Fox in a leading man role in a movie.
Yeah.
And this is right about the time he got diagnosed with Parkinson's. And that combined with the extremely long production of this film, it took 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
He was like, it's enough. I'm dealing with this stuff. I don't want to be away from my family that much. So this was his last leading man role. He still works in usually TV and voice work.
Right.
But this was it for that. Second fun fact. Sergeant Hiles was written as a parody of Lee Emery in Full Metal Jacket. They could not find an actor who could play the role right. They offered it to him, fully expecting him to turn it down, and he did not. So
like, sure.
Lee Emery is actually playing a parody of himself.
That's great.
And doing it beautifully.
Yes.
Another fun fact, this was actually almost a Tales from the Crypt movie.
Tales from the Crypt movies are usually really good. Like, so it would have been good as a Tales from the Crypt movie, but in order for it to be one of those, they would have had to make it a little more serious.
Yes.
Yeah, because I mean, Tales from the Crypt movies do have funny parts to them. Like Bordello Blood had its campy, funny parts to it. I won't say that Demon Knight did, because I don't think it did. I don't think that one was as campy and funny. But they would have had to make it a little bit darker for sure.
In chat, for some reason, Kyle just told me to choke myself.
Yeah, do it.
Not sure where that came from. A whole Friday while we're talking about dark films, choke yourself. Perhaps, right. I don't know. Maybe Kyle's a little lonely.
I think Kyle might be loaded at this point.
It is possible. He is in Idaho and it's still snowing there.
Yeah.
It was almost a Tales from the Crypt movie. Robert Zemeckis, who actually produced is the reason that it got pulled into its own full feature, because he's like, no, this is good.
Yeah.
But that's it, guys. That's our show for the night. I do
Woo!
want to thank you all for listening in. If you enjoyed the episode, do us a favor and write a review or rate us. And if you watch on the YouTubes, give us a like.
And a follow and a subscribe.
And
Hit
thanks
the
for
bell.
hanging out, because like we said a second ago, this was a very involved film, and doing the play-by-play on it took a long time. Oh, it's a Full Metal Jacket quote. Choke. That's right. That's right. It is. He's quoting Lee Emery in Full Metal Jacket.
I see.
Next week, guys, is going to be our season 1 finale. And we're going to be talking about Star Trek Discovery with a couple of guys from my charity gaming group, because Mom Thulu does not do Star Trek.
Nope.
Not only would she be useless on the episode, she probably would not be defending it.
All I would be doing is calling the aliens butt faces.
So, as we're closing up, Mom Thulu, where can the fine folks find you?
You can find me every Monday on the Innsmouth Rag. It is a podcast about horror movies. It is basically a gossip rag. We rag on horror movies, hence the name. So that's where you can find me. You can actually find me guest starring, though, on the Longbox Guys. They just released their latest episode. We were talking about horror movies there. So that's where you can find me. And sometimes on Laundry Day, I stream at twitch.tv/MomThulu. And then you can occasionally find me here. Actually, I would say probably about 90% of the time, you'll find me on the Jesters board.
All right, so good. That's our show. That's where you can find Mom Thulu. Apparently, our patron, Kyle, you can find choking himself, not with his hand. No judgment here. No judgment.
And loaded in Idaho.
And we will see you guys next week for what's going to be an awesome season finale, talking about Discovery. Thanks, folks.
Peace out, bitches.